Shapeshifters.
This is The Money Show. It's brought to you by Old Mutual. Do great things. As you can hear, we are doing an outside broadcast this evening. We're at the Inner City Ideas Cartel that's owned by NVD Property. It's a fabulous venue in downtown Cape Town, and we decided to go on a road trip. Okay, about 1 kilometer from our Cape Town studios, but still it's a road trip nevertheless, because we've invited Christo Wiese. It's the second time this year that we've invited Christo Wiese to join us. The other time we invited him, he cancelled at very short notice, but then he was a man on a secret mission, James Bond style, to save South Africa from a ratings downgrade. He was part of the team asked by Pravin Gordhan to go to London to try to convince the ratings agencies to please hold off on the downgrade. I think he succeeded. He's described as a bit Sam Walton, a bit Warren Buffett, but he is 100% Christo Wiese, and he's with us this evening. Do you know, within the closest billion, just how wealthy you are?
You know, people make the common mistake that they always look at only one side of the balance sheet. They see the assets.
Yes, I see.
They don't see the liabilities. I once had to address the Cape Town Press Club, and somebody made the mistake of referring to my status as a billionaire. I said, you know, you guys obviously don't know how to read a balance sheet. They weren't very happy with the comment, and then I said to them, but you are in very good company, because neither does my wife.
Is that a good thing? Or does she just look at the asset side of things?
Well, I mean, like most people, certainly newspaper people, she probably only looks at the one side.
Chris Bishop, the editor of Forbes Africa, once got shouted at by Aliko Dangote for underestimating Aliko Dangote's wealth. He's regarded as Africa's wealthiest man. They say that you're the third wealthiest person on the African continent. Are they right or are they wrong?
I have no idea, because I would like to quote to them what a chap, Bunter Hunt, I think, was his name. They tried to corner, they were a very wealthy family, and they tried to corner the silver market and came unstuck and lost billions. He was then called to appear before a congressional committee, and the chairman said to him, Mr. Hunt, tell me, how much are you worth? And Bunker Hunt said, I don't know. He said, but, you know, if you don't answer the question, I can hold you in contempt of Congress. How much are you worth? He said, Mr. Chairman, I don't know, because my experience has been that generally people who know how much they're worth are not worth a hell of a lot.
Were you born into a commercial family?
Yeah, you know, typical small town business family.
Uppington?
Yeah, Uppington, yeah.
And what kind of business were your parents involved in?
My dad owned a garage, and he was also a Kalahari farmer, which was quite typical of Uppington in those days.
And Mom?
My mum ran her own business later on. She had a florist shop and a bridal shop.
Okay. Uppington, the centre of Uppington's social life there.
Absolutely.
Now, you grew up in Uppington. Did you go to school in Uppington?
I went to school until what we then called Standard 8, today called Grade 10. And for my final 2 years of schooling, I went to Paarl Boys High. And
is that where you got Stellenbosch University in your blood? Because you went there to study law.
No, it's interesting. I come from what used to be called a bloedsap family. And my dad held a very strong view that good United Party kids who went to Stellenbosch became Nats, and he wouldn't have that. So for my first year at university, I went to Cape Town University.
Okay, and then what led to the change?
Well, my less than illustrious academic record made me return to Uppington with the firm conviction that I was not cut out for academics. I wanted to be a businessman. So my dad said, well, that's a fair choice, and he went and bought a business, a radiator repair business. Now, radiators were repaired, probably they still are, with carbide, which is a very hot thing.
Yes.
And my dad bought a little building in Uppington, which I swear to you was the only building in Uppington where the sun was shining 24 hours a day, plus the heat of the carbide.
Yeah.
That kind of made me think that maybe studying is not such a bad idea.
So you dropped out of UCT. What were you studying at UCT?
I always thought I was studying law.
Okay.
But it turned out that in those days when you registered, you went they had tables out and you went and registered for the subjects that you were contemplating doing. It turned out somewhere halfway through the year that I never registered for law. But I went to certain classes, particularly where there were good-looking girls. But that didn't improve the academic.
No. So you went back to Uppington, but then returned to Stellenbosch, where you did graduate with a law degree.
That's right, yeah.
But you didn't practice law immediately. You went back to Uppington. There's quite a lot of toing and froing into a cousin's business. Now, this cousin had an idea, and it was a tiny little business, I think 10 outlets, called PEP.
Yeah, by the time, I got involved in the business, there were in fact only 5 outlets.
Okay.
And the idea that a cousin by marriage, had was that he was very aware of the fact that people on low budgets with very little disposable income had great difficulty dressing themselves and their children properly. Clothes were just too expensive, and he thought there must be a way of providing clothes for people like that cheaper. And that was basically the idea. And I often tell people that those of us who are fortunate enough to have grown up without hand-me-downs or, second-hand clothes or clothes that have been gelap quite a bit, have no idea what it does for the dignity of a person if he is properly dressed. May not be fancy clothes, but clean and proper clothes. And that was his idea, which was, obviously a brilliant entrepreneurial idea.
But you didn't like playing second fiddle to him, did you?
No. I was very happy. By the time I left the business after 7 years, it had been listed on the stock exchange, and therefore had kind of lost some of its magic as a family company. It was now a public company. And I looked at the situation, and I had 3 reasons why I wanted to make a change. The first one was, as I say, the company had kind of changed its character. The second reason was that Renier, the founder, was the number 1 guy, and although my family then already, or I already then was the largest shareholder, I would not have had it any other way. He was a better number 1 than I would have been. But I also knew that I was not really cut out to be a number 2 man. And the third one was I wanted to get married. So I thought I needed a more stable life. That I would go and practice law at the Cape Bar and go home, 30 times or 30 nights of the month and not 10, the way I used to. So those were the reasons.
How long did you practice law for?
From 1974 until 1980.
But in that time, politics got into your blood. You say you were part of a Bloedsop family.
Yeah.
You actually ran for, you wanted to become a parliamentary candidate. How far did you get down that line in 1977?
Well, let me give you that little background there. My wife's late father was a very well-known politician.
Who?
And so when I married her, she said to me, look, I've been watching you. For the number of years that it took me to convince her to marry me. And she said, you're obviously a guy who gets involved in many things, and I'm quite happy with that, but 2 things you may never do. The one is you may never go into politics, and number 2 is you may never make movies. Now, the politics I understood, the movies I didn't understand. But eventually I did get into funding a movie made by a friend of mine, and then I knew that invariably the producer and the actresses get together. So, or the directors.
The director, but you were a producer, right?
Yeah, well, I was. Yeah, I certainly didn't make it with the actresses, but but then the United Party ceased to exist in 1974, and there was a split. And Forster was then the prime minister when the opposition was in total disarray, called a snap election. And they were the PFP, where my father-in-law then was a leading figure, were desperate. It was then called, it was called the PFP.
It was the PFP and the New Republic Party were there?
No, it was the PFP, the New Republic Party, and the SAP, the South African Party.
Yeah.
So some of the bloedsupper went to the SAP, and that's the guy that I stood against, John Wiley. He joined that grouping. I joined my father-in-law's grouping. And then there was the Natal crowd. They were the NRP. So I stood as a PFP candidate. Van Zyl Slabbert phoned me. I was in London. He said, look, we're looking for candidates. Would you consider being a candidate in Stellenbosch? I said, well, I'll think about it. I called my wife, and I told her, and she immediately said, no, that's fine, because she knew as a prog, there was no chance of winning Stellenbosch. So I ended up standing in Simonstown against John Wiley, who referred to me as that prog from Sea Point. And I said to him, John, I'm the boer from Uppington. I'm in it. But in any case.
So politics didn't really work out. Then, when did you go back to PEP?
I went back at the beginning of 1981.
In charge, as number one?
Yeah, I bought out the founders' shares, which made me the controlling shareholder, and I became the chairman of the company.
At what point do you and White Besson tie up? Because you see an opportunity in this period in Shoprite. Because Shoprite's an existing business when you buy in there as well.
Yeah, well, Whitey Besson and I were friends at university. His dad was also a bloedsup member of parliament called Jack Besson.
Okay.
And I may tell a funny story. Do I have time to tell a funny story?
Lots of time for funny stories.
Years ago, Whitey Besson earned a very large bonus. It's like 15 or 20 years ago, and his bonus...
Doesn't he earn a large bonus every year?
He does.
Okay.
And he deserves it.
Oh, wow.
But so he got this enormous bonus, and everybody went crazy about this. So I started noticing that when we were at dinner parties, people would ask me, Christo, how are you and Whitey related? So obviously I knew what they were getting at. But then I had an interview, and I didn't quite know how to deal with it. Because how do you expunge this perception? But then I had an interview with a chap from a well-known business publication, and he about executive pay, and I knew where he was going to get to. So in the end, he got to this. He said, Mr. Wiese, how are you and Mr. Besson related? I said, we're not related. We're very close friends, but we're not related at all. Oh, he said, but you're married to his sister, aren't you? I said, no, not as far as I know, but, and he said, yeah, but your wife's maiden name was also Besson, wasn't it? I said, yes, it was, but my wife stems from the beautiful Bessons. Whitey didn't take kindly to that. But I thought the sound bite would now make people realize that although I married a Besson now, we're not related. Because they wanted to read nepotism into it.
Of course they did. No, but it has been an extraordinarily close business relationship.
It has,
and you guys have worked together for decades to your mutual benefit.
Yeah, and hopefully the benefit of many other people. Because Shoprite today employs 136,000 people. It's a company that we bought in 1979 for a net 1 million rand. It now has a market capitalization of almost 100 billion rand. And it doesn't all belong to me.
You've got 15% of it?
Yeah.
Okay, so we got that part of the equation sorted out.
Right.
You've never been obsessed, though, with control. I mean, the Ackermans, for example, at Pick and Pay have been obsessed with control through Pickwick. They're undoing that structure at the moment. You've not been obsessed with control. You've been happy to let the business grow and bring outside shareholders in.
No, my obsession with control is just a little more hidden.
Ooh.
Because I do not, by and large, get involved in businesses that I do not control.
So explain then.
Well, in the case of ShopRite, you pointed out that I own a little bit more than 15% of the equity.
18, 20?
Yeah, 18 to 19.
Okay.
But I vote 43%.
Ah. But it is, and it's crucial, is it not?
Yeah, absolutely crucial. Not because of ego or anything else. I have a very firm belief that businesses do best when the people who take the decisions have real skin in the game, number one. Number two, it gives comfort to talented management like Whitey Besson. I cannot see somebody like Whitey Besson working for a faceless bunch of shareholders. He knows that if he has a problem, there's a person he can come to. He can come to get a quick decision. It's a different world when you have a controlling shareholder.
But how much longer can you be that controlling shareholder? You're what, 74? 4 this year?
Yeah.
Whitey is 69.
No, Whitey turned 70 this year.
Has he turned 70 this
Yeah.
year? I mean, you're the dream team that has grown this business. How long do you both continue for?
Well, Whitey suffers from an ailment that I think I also suffer from to an extent, and that is that we will live, a belief that we will live forever. That's part of the reason. It's a personality thing. Sure. But both he and I realize that our shelf life is getting smaller. But there is a huge difference. Whitey runs a business which requires enormous energy. I don't run businesses. I sit in an office called a chairman's office. And if you ask Whitey, I'll tell you this little story. A mutual friend of ours came to me one day. He said, Whitey's son worked for me for a while. And one day I called him in and I said, tell me, does your dad, Whitey, does he ever discuss business with you? And he says, ja, oom. He's a very nice Afrikaans kid. I said, ja, oom, he does. He said, now, what does your dad teach you about business? He says, well, oom, my dad said, you must just watch oom Christo. He has never worked a day in his life, and he hasn't done too bad.
But the Boscha Nostra, these are the people of Stellenbosch, this mafia, the Stellenbosch mafia. I mean, are you a tight crowd in Stellenbosch? Because I get the sense you like to compete against one another. You like to take deals away from one another. It's quite a feisty set of friendships.
Yeah, well, I mean, first of all, I'm not of Stellenbosch. I live in Clifton. So I'm not really a...
But aren't you part of that clique?
Well,
that Marcus Jooste, those
yeah,
guys?
well, because we all studied at Stellenbosch, probably.
True.
That's why people call people a Stellenbosch mafia. The thing about Stellenbosch is, it is and always has been an extremely cliquey town. There were the academics, the professors, and the doctors, and they were kind of like a little group apart. And then there were the Rembrandt people. They ruled the roost, as it were, as far as business is concerned. And then there were the rich wine farmers. They don't exist anymore today, rich wine farmers. No. There are lots of wine farmers. They are not rich. I'm one of them. And you had these different groupings. So it's a very difficult town to define as a single community.
Yeah.
So I suppose I am friendly with the guys like GT and.
Tell me about a bet you once took with GT Ferreira.
Well, an interesting story. GT in those days, particularly, was a very careful guy, and I wanted to do a certain deal but I needed to buy a block of stock that they owned.
First
RMB then. And this was in 1996, just to give context.
Right.
And the purchase consideration was 1.4 billion rand. And I invited GT for lunch. And I said, GT, I want to buy this block of stock of yours, but before we go any further, just know I don't have the money. But if I buy it from you, I will get the money and I will pay you. And he said, no, I'm quite happy to sell you the block, but what is your plan? I said, well, this is my plan. He said, you'll never make that plan work. It'll never work. I said, well, I'm convinced it will work. So can we take a bet on it? Yeah. What should we bet? A bottle of wine. Yep. I said, yeah, but here is my condition. The loser can and must buy the bottle of wine from my wine cellar at Landsrack. GT said, but what is your price? What do you sell the wine at? I said, well, in those days, 60 rand a bottle. But the loser gets it at cost price. He said, no, that's fair enough. So we shook hands on the deal and on the bet. And then I won the bet. Because
you won the bet and your deal worked out.
My
as
deal
you said
worked,
it worked,
and I paid him his money.
Good.
And he gave me the shares.
And then it came to settle the bet, and
now,
he took out his wallet.
No, we were at a dinner actually, and before we went to this formal dinner, he said, well, you know, how much do I owe you? I said, well, my accountants can send you the invoice, but the cost price of every bottle of wine in my cellar at Landsrack is 10,643 rand. He said, how do you get to that? I said, well, I bought the farm, I built a cellar, and I bottled so many bottles of wine, so I just made the sum. Any case, so at this formal dinner, he told the story, and then he said, you know, I was fairly and squarely taken. I'm now handing the check to Christo in front of all of you guys. He gave me an envelope. I walked back to the table, tore open the envelope. There was a little note. He said, Christo, here is the money for the bottle of wine. But in order to save you bank charges, you will notice that I made it payable to your wife. My wife just, you know, then gave it to some charity. And so that's the story.
But the cost price of a bottle of wine. Do you make money out of wine, or do you just do it for fun? Because, of course, Lawrenceford is your farm.
Yeah.
It's your property.
Yeah.
You bottle sparkling wine, you bottle a range of wines, but you also run markets there and let out offices and all sorts of things, which suggests that the wine business remains tough.
No, well, it's very tough. I mean, there are people who do make money out of wine. I'm not one of them. Because, you know, there have been so many changes in the wine market. But there are people who make money, and I think we are now beginning to lose less money on our wine business at Lawrenceford, which is progress.
Good. Progress is always good. Rhiannon in the front row, you've got a question for Christo Wiese this evening.
Hello. With the technological advancements like Amazon delivering things with drones and Google's self-driving car, where do you see retail in 10 years or 15 years in the mid to long term?
Well, retail, like most industries, you know, but retail perhaps more so than most, is a business that is constantly in evolution. Things change. I mean, you know, from the time I grew up, the way we ran shops and the way we run them today, I mean, it's the east to the west. This whole thing about e-commerce and Amazon and so there, the jury is still very much out on where it will end. You know, people quote these fantastic growth rates, etc., and every clever retailer today sees himself as a multi-channel operator. It's no more only the store. You have click and collect, you have, you know, internet buying, we sell a lot of stuff out of our New Look chain in the UK through Amazon and some of these others. I mean, they get the product from us. So, but I personally, my children accuse me of being old-fashioned, because I also have a healthy skepticism about climate change. So they say, I just don't understand these things. But I have a healthy skepticism as to whether all these modern methods and driverless cars and what will put the old traditional shops out of business. But there are a lot of changes happening and very difficult to forecast. But I certainly don't lose sleep over it, as I said inter alia, because we know that we have to be multi-channel.
I once asked Whitey Basson whether or not he was on Twitter. He says, no, but I employ somebody who does that stuff. Christo Wiese has built South African businesses over the last 4 decades with enormous success. You've survived the Rubicon speech. You've survived the uncertainty in the run-up to democracy. You've survived 9/11, 9/12, crisis after crisis after crisis. And many South Africans get very unsettled at times of political uncertainty, of social uncertainty. You seem to look through crisis. Do crises bother you?
No, they don't really bother me, these perceived crises, because, I often tell people when they get a bit despondent about South Africa that I've now lived long enough to have seen these perceived crises. I mean, 1948, when the Nats came to power, a lot of people left South Africa because they thought these guys can't run a modern industrial economy. Then in 1960, with Sharpeville, people fled. I mean, they gave their properties away. Rembrandt, the Ruperts, bought Fleur du Cap for a song. I mean, the most beautiful home. And then came 1976 with the Soweto riots. Again, I was a beneficiary of that because I bought a business from somebody who had given up on South Africa. And I bought it at a bargain price. And then the Rubicon speech. And then the de Klerk speech. And then the run-up to the 94 election when people were hoarding bully beef and candles. So we've seen all that. And
what gives you the courage to look through what other people see as huge obstacles?
I suppose, it's just growing up in a place like Uppington, inter alia. Growing up in a tough part of the world and growing up in a home where one had very strong values instilled. And I often quote my late mother. She died 4 years ago. She always told me, Christo, you worry about those things that you can do something about, and then you do something about them. And the rest, you can't break your head over. You can't make the whole world good. Just do what, in Afrikaans we say, wat jou hand vind om te doen.
Do what your hand...
It's a kind of a way of and then the other thing, Bruce, I've never been able to understand what the benefit is of being negative or being pessimistic. How does that help you or anybody else to focus on the negative rather than the positive?
The last time we asked you to come here, you cancelled because Pravin Gordon gave you a call and said, please come and help. We're facing a potential downgrade.
Yeah.
You responded immediately. You dropped us.
Yeah.
For the sake of the country, we understand.
Yeah.
When you look at the situation we find ourselves in right now, with some quite severe political issues, how do you look through what we're going through right now?
First of all, I look at history, and I look at the crises that South Africa had come through. You think back a little more than 100 years ago, after the Anglo-Boer War, scorched earth. I mean, there were the Afrikaner people that lost everything that they'd fought for, that they'd built up over 200 years. How must the world have looked to them? And look what happened. And so we can go through the Great Depression and the droughts and the political uncertainty and what have you. And we got through all those. So why won't we get through this one? It may be tougher in a certain sense, but at the end of the day, I have a very simple belief that history teaches us something there. And secondly, South Africans are essentially good people. And thirdly, the world wants us to succeed. That was my impression on this roadshow. We saw 250 investors plus the ratings agencies. And the general feeling was that people want South Africa to succeed. They made it very clear from the ratings agencies and from investors that the prerequisites for them to hold us in good favor are political stability. That's why what's happening at the moment is a little bit unsettling, but again, it's not the end of the world. I mean, if you look at other parts of the world.
Sure.
I personally am a little bit more than disappointed that this lady, Toko Tadiza, that they've now indicated to be the ANC candidate, is one of the ANC cadres with a very good track record. She was a good minister.
Yeah.
She's a decent person. She is a principled person. She immediately resigned when Thabo Mbeki was recalled.
Yep.
So she's got that kind of background. Now, it's hugely disappointing then when such a person is a candidate, there's this kind of reaction. But to come back to my point, political stability, fiscal consolidation, and policy certainty. If we get those things right, and a lot of them we can get right very quickly. I mean, policy uncertainty is something that the politicians can cure very quickly. You know, this whole debate about once empowered, always empowered.
Yeah, the MPRDA.
I mean, you don't want that sort of thing hanging over investors' heads. So, you know, I'm happy that we managed to get past the first hurdle in June, but I'm sure we'll get through in December as well.
John Carney, the actor, and you, roughly the same age. He was on the radio on Monday telling us his perspectives about money. He said the thing that motivates him is he's frightened of being 80 and poor. Now, even though you've got a lot of debt and you're not shy of debt, I don't think that that's what motivates you. What keeps Christo Wiese, age 74, never worked a day in his life, going?
Well, first of all, what else will I do, Bruce? I mean, it's that simple. I enjoy what I'm doing. I enjoy working with people, in many instances, a lot younger than I am. I still have a feeling that it may be small, but I make a contribution. And as I say, at the end of the day, I can honestly say I love what I'm doing.
Ladies and gentlemen, please will you give a very warm round of applause to Christo Wiese, who's been very generous with his time this evening and sharing with us some stories from his past, some funny ones, some interesting ones, and also just some real optimism about the future of South Africa when many of us get really gloomy about the state of affairs in South Africa. Christo Wiese explains how he sees through a lot of the noise that we face on a regular basis. I have blown it, Franklin. I am so sorry. I think I've messed it up. Quick question from Franklin. Quick question before we let him go. 3 seconds.
Christo, with your accumulated wealth, would you invest in existing businesses or would you start something from scratch?
I think I can honestly say I do both. That's the honest answer. We invest, and we also do start in some of these companies, grassroots operations.
But could you build the ShopRite, Pepkor, Steinhoff empire from scratch today? Brian Joffe has told me he couldn't build Bidvest from scratch today. Could you?
Yeah, but Brian built a different. There are huge differences.
Sure.
I mean, the Pep Group started as one small shop in Uppington and grew shop by shop by shop for 30 years or so before it started. Well, it's not quite true because it bought ShopRite in 1979, 14 years after starting. But there was one central business that you built brick by brick, store by store. Then you start expanding, doing bigger deals, like ultimately the big deal with Steinhoff.
Yeah.
But that's a 50-year story. I think you can still today in South Africa, and there are many people out there starting businesses with one single store and building it. I see them.
you can be an overnight success. It just
Yeah.
takes 50 years.
That's the problem.
Ladies and gentlemen, Christo Wiese.
The Money Show. Shapeshifters.